1/3 of the world's population plays games for an hour a day. More people watched people play games in the United States last year than Netflix by 2x. It's larger than film, music, and publishing combined. The current number of gamers that exists are 3.4 billion, and that number is going to skyrocket to north of 5 billion. And these are numbers that you can't ignore.
Peter Levin,
managing director and co-founder at Griffin Gaming,
a leading venture capital firm focused on investing in the global gaming market.
The passion that people have when talking about gaming it's palpable. I love what's happening in these emerging markets. Now we have markets literally the size of the African continent where those stories have yet to be told. That is very exciting to me.
As I said, when I listened to you on a podcast recently and dived into the work that you've been doing, I was really motivated to get you on the show. So yeah, I'm really happy to have you on. So thank you. Before we dive into the crux, let's start with a little who you are, what you do, and why.
Who I am and what I do. Peter Levin. I'm the co-founder and managing director at Griffin Gaming Partners, one of the world's leading and larger investment vehicles that singularly focuses on investing throughout the global gaming ecosystem.
Where we first start this journey is before Griffin. Your career is insane. So having listened to some of the stuff that you've been involved in, even things like MMA, and let's maybe start with the MMA piece, because that was something that surprised me.
It surprises a lot of folks, but I do think the common thread, if you look at my personal career trajectory, is there's this common thread around arrested development, right? Like things you gravitate towards that plateau out synchronously with your maturity index. So video games, comic books, trading cards, collectibles, even MMA. And so, yeah, there was a moment in my career where this was pre the Ultimate Fighter. So pre the UFC being what it has now become. And really the most lucrative fight promotions for mixed martial arts took place in Japan and outside of the US. And so for a moment, a cup of coffee, as I like to say, we represented about 20 to 25 of the world's top MMA fighters. So that's Randy Couture, Quinton Rampage Jackson, if you remember him, Dan Henderson, Bas Rutten, Marco Huas, who else? Matt Lindland, just a bunch of guys. And primarily they would fight, some fought in the UFC, but most of the action was taking place at Pride in Japan and some of the other promotional events that were taking place throughout Asia.
What do you make of the landscape now?
Let's see. So from there, I became very close with Scott Coker, who was the founder of Strikeforce. And I decided to get out of the representation business. The whole reason we got into it initially was the only way we would be able to figure out how these entities work financially was to reverse engineer the economics by representing the fighters first. You could reverse engineer how the money flowed through one of these operations. And I think we gleaned enough information there, really didn't want to be representing fighters in the long term. And then I partnered up with Scott, and I was a de minimis partner in Strikeforce, but I worked very closely with him. And then we ended up selling it to the UFC. And that's after the UFC was buying a bunch of different operational platforms, Pride being one of them, I think King of the Cage. And he would always say about Scott Coker and Strikeforce, there's really only one other guy out there who knows how to promote the way I do. This is Dana talking, and it was Scott. So he was always very complimentary and respectful to Scott when Scott was running Strikeforce. And then he bought it and he pretty much put it on the shelf and said, go play golf for the 3 years that you can't compete. And that's what Scott did. And his golf game improved significantly. But to see where the sport has come from where it was is incredible. And I give all that credit to what Dana's been able to do, but also to the Ultimate Fighter and what Craig Pelagian did with that show. Because if you remember, the first year that show aired, it aired on, I think back then it was Spike TV. Yeah, Spike Sports. And I want to say it was a time buy. They actually had to buy the time on the network, so there was no license fee. And I think because of the success of season one, I want to recall that the second year's license fee was astronomical, that they got paid to have that show on the air. And it did the thing that Survivor had done previously, which was it made these people personalities that you cared about and you got invested in them and their stories. And it was a perfect format for this sport because you had diverse backgrounds in close quarters and it was competitive. So it was a lot of electricity, and that show catapulted that sport from what people would consider to be cockfighting, if you will. And I think it was legal in only 2 states at the time, Nevada and New Jersey. And now you look at the state of it internationally, domestically, but culturally, it's pervasive everywhere. A lot of people would say that Dana White, the UFC, and that platform was one of the major contributing factors to this year's election.
Yeah, definitely. They played such a important part, and also the growth that you mentioned, that trajectory. I was watching a documentary actually about the evolution of UFC and how they're in the mires, they're losing about 40 million quite regularly, and they've got to the stage of valuation where they were about 6 million in value, and Shane McMahon from the WWE, the Vince McMahon's son, wanted to buy it. That never went through, and yeah, I remember on that show I was watching saying how crucial that the TV show on Spike was for galvanizing and engaging an audience base. That to me showed one of the early parts of that transmedia piece that we'll talk about in regards to your expertise and experience, just the way that people consume and engage with content, and the evolution of that brand was, yeah, like the lessons that we see today are there for all to see. It's a really engaging sport, and from a games perspective, I would like EA to create a game that captures the feeling of the sport itself. We're not quite there yet in regards to the games that we're playing at the moment. It has a really good community and audience base. So yeah, it's an amazing sport.
That's something I talk about often as well, which is it is disappointing that there's not a game to match the passion that the fan base has. And I think they sell units because they brand it well, but there really should be a game that's on par with EAFC and PGA 2K and MLB The Show. It's a big enough sport. It's deserving of it. I also think there could be a variety of different permutations of it as well. It's something that we talk about.
So tell me about the evolution from the MMA side of things to Nerdist to Lionsgate to ultimately Griffin that we see today. How did that come about?
Even pre the MMA stuff, I've been a gamer my whole life. And when I went over to Disney, my corporate strat planning in 95, 96, and then right over to Disney Online, where I was like employee 18. This was when Disney Online was just getting stood up. And I left, I think they had 800 employees, and that was just 2.5 years later. But it was a great place to learn. I was a senior producer there, a VP, and I was in charge at the time of the game, sports, and news group for Disney Online. And that's really where I got my first chops operating a team with a bunch of reports. And it was the early days of the internet and the ability to stream both content and interactive software where you could play games. The latency issues were diminishing. And from there, I ran a small pledge fund with my boss at the time. And of the investments we made, I did quite well. But the first investment I ever made was GameSpy Industries, if you remember GameSpy, which was really a software crawler that allowed for you to play other people around the world in a similar game. It's like an extended LAN party. Either you played locally or you used GameSpy and their software crawler to play people that were all over the globe. So if you wanted to play Duke Nukem, Quake, Doom, Half-Life, you needed to use their technology. And it was the old Warren Buffett mantra of invest in what you know. And this is what I knew and I liked and I used. And it had a bumpy ride. That company almost went away 4 times over 4 years, but then it went on that hockey stick trajectory. It got to the point where if you were going to buy a game and it didn't have GameSpy enabled on the back of it, you probably wouldn't buy the game because that software allowed for you to reach a community. It was very sticky. But as an investor in the games sector, it was a huge eye opener too, because it allowed for me to understand that this window into this consumer behaviors through GameSpy was like a heat map of the global gaming ecosystem. And I found that fascinating. And so I've pulled elements of that first investment into my common thesis today around making sure that we're equally invested in companies that are on the content side, the consumer facing side, but also companies that give us rare insights, proprietary data sets into what the consuming constituency is doing.
And in regards to consumer, what's your opinions of the marketplace today? Not only from what players are maybe clamoring for, but also from the types of companies that you go to invest in. Is there a specific set of value sets that you look at in regards to companies that you want to partner with? Or
sure, we look for some of this is going to be demonstrating my master's degree in the obvious, but I think we look for phenomenal founders. Obviously, repeat founders is great. I think the ratio of success with respect to repeat founders in gaming punches way above its weight. So it over indexes. We look for maturing subgenres in gaming where we think there's room for innovation. And we look for teams that are excited about that. And we see a tremendous amount of deal flow annually north of 2,000 qualified deals. And we have a vast data set. Coupled that to 25 years of investing in the sector, we have a lot of comps and data sets from which to work. And at the end of the day, it is a data-driven exercise for us. We have some proprietary ways with which we analyze an opportunity. Again, having been doing this as long as we have.
What about the whole transmedia element though? Because with regards to where the industry's evolved into, we see amazing crossover. I know that you were behind one of my favorites of all time, that being Fallout, and the work that you did to bring that to life. But also there's other examples. We see things like Arcane, The Last of Us, the elements of John Wick that was in Fortnite. I'd love to get your take on that transmedia piece and how it impacts the larger view in respect to storytelling community and the evolution of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's a fun time to be doing what it is that we're doing within the industry that we're doing it. Fallout was a lot of fun to help architect. It's one of my 2 favorite worlds ever. And to have been able to get access to Todd Howard and the folks at Bethesda and to go in there with kind of an open palette of ideas. And I think the reason we were able to get that traction there was oftentimes traditionally when people would go into a situation like that, they would go in with, hey, here's our writer, here's our take, here's our director, here's the package. Can you sign the rights over? And I think sometimes in the past, people think, wow, that's really attractive. That's a big name director or a writer who's written things that I really know and like and respect. I think our orientation was completely the opposite. It was, look, we really want to do this. We'd love to do it in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think most folks were pitching them on doing a Fallout movie. And most importantly, Todd, we want you to be involved every step of the way and sign off on any and everything. And we'll vet this large number of showrunners, but we'll bring you a finite set and introduce you. And at the end of the day, it's your call. And that's how it happened. And when Jonah Nolan got on the phone with Todd, it was literally like 2 people fall in love at a bar, right? It was like their eyes met and love was in the air. But it was very evident someone who's obsessed with Fallout. And I know the subtlety and nuance of that game and the cleverness of the writing and even the color palette and the soundboard. And Jonah was expressing all of that. And he knew the deviations from one title to the next. He was a student of the brand. And when you're able to find that passion, couple that passion to a partner on the other side who's willing to take some chances with their intellectual property, you end up with a product like the show, which was great, which was super fun. But it was also very respectful to the fan base, to a lot of tongue in cheek, a lot of Easter eggs. I think my very good friend just produced The Penguin, and that show's brilliant. It's being talked about as the best comic book adaptation series ever. And they had so much fun with it. You could tell, right? They just went so deep and there were little wink nods to the fan base along the way, but it was unlike anything the market had seen. And I think so much of why this is happening the way it is happening are the creators are people who grew up playing games. And so it's much easier for them when their frame of reference is something that they're super passionate about. I think in generations past, the source material oftentimes was a newspaper article, a magazine article, a book that had been read, a story that had been told. I think there's a reason why 3 years in a row, the number 1 streaming show on the global streaming platforms will have been based on a game. This year, Fallout, last year, Last of Us on HBO Max, and the year before, The Witcher, based on the game, which was originally based on a graphic novel. And 3 of the top 10 films at the box office last year were Gran Turismo, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Super Mario, all based on games. And I think you're going to see more and more of these quality adaptations from intellectual properties that millions and millions of people are passionate about. And they love the fact that they get to experience these intellectual properties in other form factors with this hub and spoke model, and not to treat the extensions as de minimis, but to give them equal respect and equal blood, if you will, into those arteries. And I think that's why toyetically they did incredibly well with their licensing and merchandising. They had some great games over the years. I'd like to see more. They were able to do scripted content. They were able to do, obviously, their live events. And so that's a true hub spoke transmedia model that's been quite successful.
Definitely. And the whole fun element as well in regards to the storytelling. You've mentioned each and every one of those. And from a game perspective, I'm playing again for about the gazillionth time. The Last of Us, it's my favorite game of all time. I just think it's absolutely amazing from a storytelling perspective. And also how you touch upon the WWE and the work they've done is to utilizing community and content to engage and provide that whole deeper realm of entertainment. I think that, yeah, they're a real master of the piece as well. But the piece that I'm looking in now is also what you said as well about the Easter eggs element, where content isn't just a regurgitation of a piece, but it's an elevation and the ability to provide something more to the players, to doff the cap to those guys, and also to provide something new and inclusive for new audience bases as well. And I think that's why when we tune into some of these shows at the moment that they're doing so well, it's just they've got so many different layers and appreciations to the piece that, yeah, like for me, that's the beauty of the transmedia element, because the depth of content, the depth of the story is just so engaging and immersive.
It is. And I think that passion and that caring shows through. I think the casting too is so contemplative, right? And it's all indicia, again, of those that are behind these efforts being very passionate and knowledgeable about these games. The amount of alpha being generated by Bethesda, Microsoft, right? The revenue that will come in from those who used to play the game and want to replay the game, those are discovering the game for the first time. The soundtrack was blowing up everywhere. There's such a cool, fun part of the show and the game. The licensing and merchandise was picking up in a material way because it's such a cool moment in time where the game is set that it allows for a lot of these extensions to be celebrated and appreciated.
As well as like storytelling and an appreciation of the content, what do you think are the other key factors to success?
I think it absolutely starts with story, but I think mission critical to the shows that have worked and the films that have worked are those behind them not looking at it as a way to exploit a huge audience, but a celebration of the quality of the brand equity. Most people who play these games play hundreds, if not thousands of hours within these worlds. And they're very particular, and they have in their own mind's eye a vision of how they want to see this thing adapted. And that's super cool. And it can come out in surprising ways. But I think at the end of the day, be respectful to the audience as well. These are audiences that are vocal. They'll express opinions. They're not shy about it. And I think being smart about taking that feedback and listening to them and understanding what is important to them. Not saying that you should cow to them in any way. It's a great resource. If you go on Reddit or Discord and you look into what people are saying about these games, and if you go on Steam and read the feedback of each and every one of the games and the chronology of a Fallout product, like it's fascinating to see what people were excited about and less excited about and curious about which direction the story was going to go. And again, I think in today's world, to not use those tools is missing an opportunity. And I think these creators do. They like to get into that. They like to see where the audience would like to see the brand go. And also there's been some missteps, Fallout 76. And I think the way they handled that on the Bethesda side was great. Todd came out and said, hey, you know what? We shipped too early. It was bumpy. We're fixing it. Mea culpa. And that's the way to do it versus going into lockdown mode and not being communicative with your fan base and the consumers of the game. And I think there's a lot of appreciation. I remember when he did that in the community for the fact that he came out and owned it.
Yeah, I think ownership of errors is important in any form of leadership. Take ownership and accountability of something rather than just ignoring the fact that it wasn't a great game. But as well as that, from your experience and the work that you've been involved in, what are the challenges and lessons from that particular space?
Yeah, look, I've been doing what is now being called transmedia crossovers, adaptations for 2.5 decades of a variety of different type. And I would say the common denominator has always been treating the relationship like a partnership and not an extension of a licensee-licensor dynamic. That notion of, I'm going to pay you for the rights to your thing and we're going to do this in a very transactional structure. You're not going to be all that motivated to lean into it. And so all of a sudden our interests aren't really aligned. So it's on my shoulders. The burden is mine to bear and I've got to execute against it. And that just doesn't work. And I think those were the yesteryears of these types of adaptations where you had a number cruncher just looking at the gobsmacking numbers of a World of Warcraft, for example, and saying, hey, let's go make a movie based off of this. And they made a suboptimal movie, but for the Chinese who loved it. And that's where they generated the gross box office to put that film into the black, but the movie's not a good movie. And it felt like a very transactional adaptation. So I think the lessons learned are making sure that everyone's interests are aligned, both creatively and financially. Everyone's incentivized for this to be successful, and you're not going to laugh while I'm crying, and I'm not going to cry while you're laughing. And I think setting up that dynamic is incredibly important.
What about the broader implications of the games industry as a whole? Because the thing that I often look at is how a lot of people don't actually appreciate the huge scale and opportunity of the games industry. From a revenue stance is one point, but also its whole influence on culture and the younger demographic. I'd love to get your take on that, and also from a statistical perspective, the scope of opportunity in gaming versus the likes of music and entertainment as a whole.
Yeah, it's larger than film, music, and publishing combined. 1/3 of the world's population plays games for an hour a day. And the current number of gamers that exists are 3.4 billion. And that number is going to skyrocket to north of 5 billion when markets the size of the Middle East, North Africa proper, and the Indian subcontinent continue to mature and come online. And then you've got markets down in Latin America that continue to grow and prosper, and kind of regulation is lifting, and you're going to see more external capital investing into markets like Brazil and Colombia and Mexico. And there's a lot of growth. More people watched people play games in the United States last year than Netflix by 2x. It's great. And these are numbers that you can't ignore. But I think COVID was also a huge psychological barrier that was removed for gaming, because you had a lot of folks spending a lot of time with their kids in hours where they typically didn't. And they were noticing that little Sally and little Johnny weren't watching television shows or movies. They were either gaming or they were watching other people play games. And so there was a big kind of global aha moment during COVID, coupled to the fact that the numbers in gaming were skyrocketing during COVID. It was a very heady time for the industry, but I think also this generational psychological barrier was removed, where people just were watching how the media in their home was being consumed and in what form factor.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll touch upon it later in regards to forward planning and the implication of COVID upon the industry. We've seen a lot of merchant acquisitions, but equally we've seen a lot of turnover as to staff layoffs and redundancies. Before we get to that point, I wanted to go back to the emerging markets and the key opportunities that you see from places like Latin America, India, and so on and so forth, to the wider landscape of games and the types of stories and narratives that's going to come out of those regions.
Yeah, we invest all over the globe. So we've invested in the Middle East. We've invested in Turkey and India. And I just came back from my 56th trip to Finland, where we announced an investment we made there with Lasse, who's the co-founder of Supercell and co-creator of Clash of Clans and Clash Royale, Copenhagen, Hong Kong, Singapore, you name it. We've invested in the region. But the growth in markets like the Indian subcontinent is exciting to see. The demographics, the way they consume is much different than in other markets. We see Middle East, North Africa, where you've got individual countries there where 70% of the population is under the age of 40, and they're all playing games, whether that's EAFC, Call of Duty, Overwatch, God of War. There's a bunch of titles over there that are just punch way over their weight. And that's fun to see. And then it's not really mature enough yet for us, but we're incredibly intellectually curious around the timing for Africa to start to be underwritable from our orientation. There's still a lot of moving parts over there, but we spend a lot of time talking to the ecosystem players because it's going to be an incredibly exciting market. Maybe it's 7 years, maybe it's 10 years, but we're keeping a close eye on it. And I think the other question you asked, which I'm personally very excited about, are the stories that are going to come out of these geographies too, right? Because there's only so many kind of dystopian games you want to play and only so many battle setting games. Look, I'm a COD guy. I play Call of Duty with my team. That's what we play. We hired the gentleman who matriculated first to partner within our firm. I met him while playing Call of Duty during COVID because he was a professional Gears of War player. And we brought him on as a ringer to get more dubs. And but a very bright guy. And he'd been working for a Swiss multinational company in corporate development. And you know what I learned after 6 months of playing Call of Duty with him was he was great under pressure, really good teammate, likable. And it was like a 6-month interview where I wasn't even thinking I was interviewing the guy. And my point is, with some of these other regions that we're talking about, to get local lore and stories to come from the Middle East, North Africa, from Indian subcontinent, from Africa proper, that's going to be so much fun as a gamer to be able to get your hands on product that just doesn't look, smell, feel, taste like things that we've played 100 times before. And I think that's one of the reasons from wearing my consumer hat that I'm so excited about these growth markets is the differentiation of the product that we're going to be able to get our hands on. That's fun. But also, I've spoken to kids and had some internships from these parts of the world that have come together with portfolio companies or relationships of ours. And, you know, a couple of them said to me point blank, I love this game. I just wish more people in the game looked like me. And I was like, oh, that's a really poignant thing to say. There should be more stories and lore from that part of the world, which would demand that. And I'm excited about that and what the future will bring with respect to that type of product.
Yeah, definitely. When I was at EA, going over to like Asia to take a look at what they're doing and the importance of culturalization and localization, what games work, what games don't. And yeah, there's a whole depth of narrative there that we've just scratched the surface on, essentially. And it's a bit like, I remember going out to Finland and doing some work over at Track 20, and I love Finland, but it also baffles me is they're a country so small, their global impact that they have within the games industry is huge. And I'd love to take your take on the work that you did with Sulake and Rovio, and ultimately why Finland is such a hotspot for games.
It's an amazing place. It really is my second home. I really did just come back from my 56th trip there. I've been up to Lapland and I've been in hundreds of saunas there. After every board meeting there, you go in the sauna and then you jump in the Baltic. They're a bit like Norway in the Winter Olympics, right? You have the small country Norway and they dominate the Winter Olympics. I think so much of what went right in Finland with respect to gaming, so much of it stemmed from Nokia, right? Nokia, the handset manufacturer. If you remember back to the Series 40 and Series 60 phones, they had the game Snake, right? And Snake was a rudimentary game, but it was this window into their thinking of, hey, this piece of hardware can do more than just make phone calls. There is more to do with it than that. And I think that DNA at Nokia, you had a lot of really smart people there. And then those people either started their own companies or they started teaching at university. And so you had this new thinking from people on the hardware side about the software that could live and breathe within that hardware. And then Sulake, I was on the board of Sulake for 5 years. I think I started going over there in 03, 04. And they were really they, along with Nexon, kind of invented free-to-play game. And they were the first virtual world of their type, their version of an MMO. And it was like a Club Penguin structure, right? You as a parent would give your child 20 quid or whatever it is to play in that game for a month. Every month you could re-up and give more credit so that your kid could do more within the friendly confines of the game, but it was a safe, COPPA-compliant environment. I was asked to join that board because of my specialty with intellectual property, and that they wanted to strike partnerships with global intellectual properties. And at the time, the biggest movie in the world was Twilight. And so I was able to help them partner up with the studio that made Twilight, the films. And the biggest TV show at the time was American Idol. And that was being formatted all over the world. And so we were able to get a relationship together with American Idol. And so that kind of kicked off in that part of the world. Oh, this Peter Levin guy knows how to put these partnerships and relationships in place. And they're not just, hey, Sulake, write a big check to the studio that owns this IP. But no, let's get a partnership, a relationship in place that's mutually beneficial and can live on past just this window of a minimum guarantee. And when executed well, that inures to the benefit of both parties more significantly than any upfront de minimis financial transaction, right? If you do it, it increases the enterprise value on both sides. The brand equity value increases. The consumer experience is a qualitative one. And I think the inverse is at the time, there was a lot of really bad promotional mobile games that were being created around films and television series. And I would always argue that those cut the wrong way. It was annoying for people to have to download something to their phone and then purge it because it wasn't of a good quality. And that to me is a negative connotation towards the underlying intellectual property. Like, why would you ever do that? And I think those days are long gone, thankfully. And now people are much more contemplative about it. And they understand that in success, not only can they be financially rewarded, but the relationship and a much more intimate relationship with the fan base and the consumer is possible if you're just more thoughtful in that process.
What do you think about the whole landscape of games? So in regards to people being made redundant, and I guess the broader feeling how some, not all, but within the industry are more focused on the metrics of monetization than the actual delivery of quality experiences to the player. Do you think it's a problem within the industry? Do you think that people maybe aren't having their gaze as far as it should be, being too short-termist, or what are your views?
Gaming, look, there's a rough element to gaming always, which more resembles enterprise software. And legacy media hangs on to people for decades at times. Like people that, if you go onto the lot at Paramount or Sony, there's buildings that are filled with people that you can scratch your head and say, why do they need that many people to do what they doing? They don't. And that's why you're seeing really smart people like David Ellison and his group buying Paramount, because they're going to rejigger that thing. Regardless of your political orientation, there's a lot of people out there that like the thought of someone like Elon Musk getting control of a government structure and infrastructure and let him make it more efficient. Hopefully it works, but there are people that are excited about it. And I think gaming has always been pretty mercenary about recognizing we have to trim the fat. We're going to do that. We're not going to hang on to thousands of employees if they're no longer impacting the business positively. Gaming has always embraced bleeding edge technology. AI has been in gaming for 20 years. Non-playable characters have existed for 20 years. We've always been tip of the spear on these emerging technologies. More importantly, the practical application of those technologies. And of course, don't like to see anyone lose their jobs, but it is a sign that the industry is healthy when the industry is able to do so somewhat nimbly versus hanging on for the sake of hanging on, as technology has rendered some of the function of some of these individuals. It's just no longer necessary. And it's painful, but it's always been a thing in gaming. There's always been those ebbs and flows.
It's common throughout the history of games, the ebbs and flows. And also it can be a good thing as well, because as people pivot out of positions, they're forced to reflect and look at what they want to do and the impact that they want to deliver. And often it leads to new companies being formed and better experiences being delivered to the player. So yeah, totally with you on that. I want to get your take on recently, if you look at the Saudis' Vision 2030 program, they invested $38 billion into games investment. I wanted to get your viewpoint in regards to the implications for the global industry, and also from Griffin's perspective on that particular announcement that wasn't too long ago.
I think it's great when you've got any culture where your leadership are gamers. They're consumers of games. That particular leadership, they're fans of manga, anime, and gaming. They bought one of our portfolio companies, Scopely, for $4.9 billion. So we were thrilled to have that be a part of the direction within which they're going. They executed the Esports World Cup this past summer, which went incredibly well. And I think they're the only ones who could do that. Esports as a promotional initiative is a challenging business to be in. It services hundreds of millions of fans, but as a business, that's tough for the Saudis to underwrite that effort and put on that event at that caliber. It's great because no one else is going to do that. And I think that's good for the industry. The ability for these emerging markets with resources to continue to invest into the sector, I think is nothing but a good thing. I think it's going to bring cultures closer together. I remember when they first started getting active, there's a lot of pushback from a lot of corners of the media landscape. If you look at the changes that have happened just in that market in KSA, if you look at what's happened there socially over the last 7 to 10 years, you can't really point to anywhere on earth where there's been that much change. And there's been some missteps, and we don't need to get into any of that politically. Clearly, there were mistakes made, but I do think one of the best ways to fix these types of cultural chasms are to find ways to play together. Because I think people want to play games together. They want to listen to music together. They want to go to movies together. They want to watch streaming shows together. They want to buy comic books. They want to do these things where there's a lot of social stickiness and community around. And I think we're seeing a lot of that signal coming out of that part of the world. Is the answer to shy away from that or to try to embrace it and help that progress continue?
I think it's an amazing thing that they're doing. I think it's very forward looking in regards to what they want to be as a society and also economically where they want to lay down those foundations. And yeah, I think in the long term, it'll be amazing for the industry as a whole. I've got a personal belief that I do think there's maybe too much sway towards the States in that regard. Like I look at the UK as a market. It's farcical to say the word only, but we're only 7 billion in regards to the games industry here. I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK to have a larger say in that industry as a whole, especially from our cultural heritage in regards to football and other pieces. Yeah, like I want to see new emerging markets growing. I want to see new stories being delivered. I want to see new experiences being experienced and played. And yeah, like the more that can enter the industry, the better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we're going to continue to see established and emerging markets prioritize gaming. It's not something you can ignore any longer. And when I see markets with young leadership that are passionate about gaming, it has an effect. It is not regarded in these markets as, it's not stigmatized, it's proselytized. And I think that filters down and has a very positive effect to anyone you're talking about. When I'm in the Middle East, North Africa, again, India, the passion that people have when talking about gaming it's palpable.
I want to touch quite a bit on your viewpoints on the future of the industry, especially bearing in mind the various technological shifts that we've seen of late. So I wanted to start by understanding your viewpoints on the impact of things like AI, VR, and AR on gaming and wider on engagement as a whole.
Sure. I think AI is getting to the point where we're not going to have to talk about AI anymore because it's just going to be everywhere, which is a good thing. Because it's already, look, as I mentioned earlier, AI has been a fundamental part of gaming for a long time. The practical application of AI in areas like QA testing, it makes all the sense in the world. Customer acquisition, being able to determine how best to reach a customer through what daytime, through what geography, which gender. There's so many, I think, touch points where the levering of AI tools is going to be wildly impactful to developers and publishers. And that's the practical application of it. I think the picks and shovels businesses are really interesting. I think the bigger stuff, and I think even the LLMs are challenged here. And the bigger issues for us as an allocator, as a platform that underwrites businesses, is we still got to figure out what the bigs are going to do. And until we do, we're going to be very cautious as we invest into the sector. But we have a handful of investments already. We have tons of our portfolio companies are levering AI tools, A/B testing product, which is great because it allows for them to crawl before they walk, before they run, and better understand how to create efficiencies for the products that they're trying to get out. But we're excited about it. We see it having major impact on art asset creation. And yes, at the end of the day, that is again going to probably do away with some jobs. I don't see it as being the end all be all with art creation, art asset creation, but there are gaps that it will fill. And that's okay. Like I said, that's something the games industry has been able to embrace more elegantly than legacy media.
I'm personally excited by the depths of fan engagement that we can do in regards to AI. It opens up far more opportunities in regards to the cultivation and creation of ongoing community relationships. And I was speaking to Adolf on a previous podcast. We were talking about FIFA in this regard. When we look at how you can correlate the playing experience with the actual real lived experience and the ability to utilize live ongoing data sets and the ability to draw in things like transfer windows, rumors, ongoing communications that's occurring on Twitter, and the way that we truly experience sport and all the different connotations of it. The fact that we can lean into AI to help support that ongoing narration is something that fills me with a lot of optimism because I see the possibility for what the future games may be. far beyond a simple campaign to something that's more of a broader, deep, immersive experience on the premise of entertainment.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly the ability to have a much more personalized experience, to even interact with the characters much differently per person and have a discrete experience that your mate's not going to have whilst playing the same game. I think that's going to be a lot of fun for folks. And in particular with games like you're talking about, where there's an ongoing engagement, real-time data could be injected into the game that has impact on the game. And so you'll be rewarded for being vigilant. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can have fun with it.
I was watching Trip Hawkins a little while ago, and he was talking about the possibility for browser gaming and industry disruption. So I'd love to get your take on potential growth areas as well.
Yeah, we're bullish on browser gaming as well. There's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening. Fast games, as they're being called. There's a lot of smart entrepreneurs that are looking at how best to lever the existing technology to create engaging experiences, to circumnavigate the marketplaces. You're starting to see more and more energy being deployed there. I think at the end of the day, that's great for the consumer, because you should be able to have as an elegant experience with your game and be as ambulatory as you want to be to have it, right? So I should be able to play on my phone, on my laptop, on my PC, on my Switch, on whatever tablet. I should be able to have in today's world a quality experience with that game. And the fact now that it's still clunky, and the fact when we get asked about persistent identity and Web 2.5, it's nutty to me how easy it is to sign on to Apple TV or Roku, right? And I can bop between Amazon and ESPN and Disney Plus and Netflix. But every time I want to sign on to a different game platform, it's 3-factor authorization, signing my life away. It's crazy. And the churn that leads to, the amount of people who just hop off platform because it's frustrating. And that has to change too. And I think removing some of these tropes from yesteryear and letting people have a consuming experience with much less friction is a good thing. I think browser-based gaming is definitely one of those potential areas.
One of the things that I'm really impressed by at the moment is the steps that Netflix are making. I know that how they started in regards to a lot of the legacy content, but that building up a portfolio was key to their movement. But equally, when I start seeing the ability to use what is the most utilized device in the world, that being our mobile phones, to turn that into controllers and have that more direct experience with titles. Yeah, I'm stoked to see where they're heading, because people like Mike Verdu, especially in his new changed role, I'm keen to follow that journey. I think that they're onto something quite special. Yeah, I think that also there's a lot of lessons, as you say, when we take back the various different steps through that process and allow for less of a clunky experience. That's going to be key. But yeah, I'm just excited to see where the industry is evolving to, not simply from the partnerships that are going to evolve from this process, but also the longer term value that we're going to curate through the building and maintaining of better quality IP that can be experienced by a multitude of players and maybe those new to the industry as well.
Yeah, I think Netflix is a great example. They bought I think the last studio they bought was called Next Games out of Helsinki, which I was an investor in. And I actually I helped put their partnerships together with both Stranger Things and The Walking Dead through one of our venture partners and IP advisors to our fund, Russell Binder. He helped us lock down both of those IPs for Next Games, and then Netflix bought it. So thank you, Netflix. So we've been spending a lot of time with Mike and his team there, Leanne, and they're just an incredibly smart group of people that understand full well there's no reason to push people off platform, right? They should be able to do anything that they want to do with respect to having a good media experience on platform. And I think the cost of reacquiring people once they're off the platform is prohibitive. Why drive them elsewhere when you can create fantastic experiences on platform, whether that's interactive storytelling or more linear? The effort to delight on multiple fronts, I give them a lot of credit, and they're just smart enough to pull it off. So it's going to be fun to see what they do. And you're starting to see activity and signal from the other players as well, which does nothing but expand the TAM for gaming, which is good for me. And you mentioned earlier VR and AR, which I think we're not bullish on. And I've never invested in a VR company, and I'm not going to anytime soon. And that's disappointing to me because in success, VR would also expand the TAM. And so if the total addressable market is increased because VR is taking off, that's great. But VR still feels like it's 5 years away from being 5 years away. And that's okay. I think avoiding hype cycles is something that we try to deploy that discipline against. VR just isn't ready for prime time. There's a novelty to it. It's fun to play some of the games, but it still leaves some people not feeling great. Some people feel nauseous. It's very antisocial, strapping a piece of hardware onto your face, where gaming has gone so very social. And that's the beauty of, I think COVID was, again, just a huge aha moment with regard to that and just how social it is. The price points are expensive. That hardware needs to come down. And at the end of the day, the games thus far, if you forensically parse through the data, they're not repeatable. People play them. There's a novelty to it, but they're not seeking to play them day in and day out with their cohort. And until that gets figured out, it's, in our opinion, at least with respect to gaming, it's not under rental.
I've always looked at it a little bit like the Wii, but without the accessibility. So like the Wii, there's a certain level of novelty with that. You've got the ability to play with family and friends. When you look at VR, I do see an opportunity there, but yeah, you're right on the money in regards to the price point. The price is too high for the vast majority of players. And also, in my eyes anyways, is the storytelling. There's not a level of immersive storytelling to keep me captivated for a long period of time. So I still look at it more as a gimmick and actual value add to the industry. And yeah, I hope it changes, because I think anything that broadens the experience and broadens the relationship to play is key. But at the moment, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not sold on the idea. I'm not against it, but I think that there's a lot of work to be done there. For me, I look more towards, like you mentioned, about the communal aspect and the social aspect. This is why I always have been, for a long period of time, a fan of Hazelight. I think that whole co-op experience is something worth digging deep into, because in it, A Way Out and then It Takes Two, I'm really fascinated in regards to what they produce, because I think their ability to connect players is really interesting, to draw in new audience bases, and also from an experience stance, it differentiates from simply being quite isolated as a player. You're part of an experience, but you're still playing by yourself. But with a co-op title, I'm quite intrigued as to that landscape. So I'd love to get your take on that as well.
I think we're going to see so much of that, right? Especially as players who grew up playing Minecraft and Roblox, it's a much different mindset, and they're more focused on that communal, that party element to gaming. They're more focused on that at times than they are the fidelity of the game itself, right? They care less about AAA graphics, right? Or a core game mechanic that has evolved beyond what they played last year. And that's exciting, because I think, back to your point about being story driven, like they care way more about the stories and those with whom they're exploring these stories and these experiences. And that's another kind of subgenre of gaming that is a healthy result of what we've seen from Roblox and Minecraft and even Fortnite. And we're going to continue to see exciting things come out from those form factors. We're bullish on that as well. I think we're going to start to see again that age group matriculates up, and some of these developers move off those platforms. They're going to start up businesses, and we're going to start to see more and more of it from our vantage point.
And I also think there's going to be more of an appreciation of the actual in-game communities that are curated, because one of the reference points to this, I think, would be The Remarkable Life of Evelyn, in regards to that guy's connection to the World of Warcraft. And ultimately, he was paralyzed from the neck down. So he could hardly do anything physically in his real life, but in the actual game, he played a character that was central to a huge community. And sadly, when his passing came, all these people from all around the world descended upon his funeral and passed on their love and thoughts and regards. And that, to me, showed the true power of gaming. It's not necessarily just a story, but it's the ability to move people and curate real, authentic, deep level of relationships, empathy, and emotion. And I think that, for me anyways, some of the best stories and some of the best games that I've played, it's where they're willing to lean into some of these difficult stories and articulate the depth of narrative that can come from hardship. And again, like we've mentioned COVID earlier, but just one of many stories that we can go through. There's loads of narratives that can emerge from this moment that we've all been through, and also our outlook to what the future holds. And yeah, that's what I'm excited for, just as much as the evolution in the industry is the depth of story that we can pass on. And yeah, that's what fills me with a lot of hope. Before we close out, I wanted to just get your view on other opportunities for innovation that you're seeing today, without having naming names, because I know that you've got a lot on your roster, but maybe some emerging players, some kind of strategies and pathways for creativity that you're looking at in regards to investments that are helping maybe sway your decision making at the moment.
I think it comes down to phenomenal teams, the ability to execute, and then an opportunity set in the market, right? Those stars have to align. The data doesn't lie. We're very KPI driven. We're very analytically driven. And that has worked for us. The thing that we typically don't do is invest into hype cycles. For a moment, esports teams were all the rage, and we've never touched an esports team. VR, XR, AR, we haven't invested in any of that. Metaverse, we've definitely invested in some of the picks and shovels around what people are calling the metaverse, but I think a lot of that was the hyperbole around that. And certainly some of what we were seeing in crypto, although I do think Web 2.5, Web 3 gaming is going to be a huge part of the landscape. It's just not going to happen as fast as everyone thought for a moment in time. Just look at what's happening in the markets now. AI, similarly, wanting to make sure that you invest intelligently and not reacting to a hype cycle. And I think that's part of us wanting to make sure that we retain the discipline that we try to deploy. And so we don't come up with, oh, this is the hot thesis, this is the new thing, we're going to go investigate against that. We're just going to continue to do what we do. We're a blocking and tackling fund. And as we see, whether it's fast games, browser-based games, whether it's more collaborative, social games that are being built on top of existing platforms such as Roblox, when we look at how big indie gaming has gotten again, and you look at the success of Steam, that's just all very positive signal. So the exercise is, okay, then what's the entry point for investment in what makes sense for a firm such as ours?
I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's an absolute pleasure. But just to close out, I wanted to ask you, one being your key thought and takeaway that you'd like to leave with our audience, and another being what excites you the most about the future of the games industry. And I guess, are there any parts of the industry that you feel are underestimated or undervalued?
I love to talk to people like you too, right? So what I've enjoyed of late, and I've been doing more of this, the number of people that you can have hours long conversations about gaming, and you and I have just scratched the surface. There's so much that we have not touched on today, which is great, right? It's amazing that this industry, which has now been around for 4 decades, it's come so far, and it's regarded in such a different way now that there's multiple ways to have a career in interactive storytelling. And now there's even more of these businesses that are adjacent to gaming are going to be underwritable, and there'll be a way to play and to pursue, again, a career. And if you look at universities and how robust programs for interactive storytelling are at some of the biggest universities in the US and even internationally, that's all really positive signal. What am I personally excited for? I love what's happening in these emerging markets. I'm excited for, I would like lore from these regions to be told through gaming. There's so much lore in the Middle East, North Africa, and Africa proper, and the Indian subcontinent. And I want to be able to play killer games that tap into that lore, and I want new aesthetics. I remember when Sulake and Supercell and Rovio, when they first started really becoming a massive scale, we would see little subtleties and nuances from these companies from Finland, just in the soundboard and the color palette that we really hadn't seen before. And that was fun. It just didn't look, smell, feel, taste like everything we'd seen before. And that was great. And I think we see that at times coming from Korea and China and Japan. But now we have markets literally the size of the African continent where those stories have yet to be told. And we've yet to bump into what those creators are going to be able to put in front of us. And that is very exciting to me, just as a consumer. I can't wait for that.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time.